Hi guys, a Scottish YouTuber who appears to be a unionist and a Brexiteer posted this video online and it appeared in my feed, titled "Scotland Cannot Rejoin the EU." Now right off the bat there seems to be a few problems even with this title, but it's based on an article from GB News, so perhaps my criticism shouldn't be directed at the YouTuber. However, he does seem to make some mistakes when it comes to both how the Scottish government works and how the EU operates. Let me be clear, I'm not an expert on Scotland, the EU, or the operations of Westminster, and I will no doubt make some mistakes in this video, but what this guy seems to say is deeply flawed. Anyway, enough of my blabbing, let's get into the video.
This is one thing that's bothered me about the SNP for a very, very long time, right? It's the whole, we hate Westminster, we hate England, you know, we have to pay them money, but they give us a little bit of money back. And we have to abide by their laws and their rules. And when it comes to voting on said legislation, the Scottish people are overwhelmingly outnumbered. So,
Okay, well, let's start with the England part first. I've yet to hear a member of the Scottish National Party ever say that they hate England. Now, are there members or even supporters who hate England? Yes, I'm pretty sure there are. In the same way that there are members of the Labour Party or the Conservatives who are flat earthers. But I don't care about those people. I care about the people who are in power. Now, has anyone from the SNP in the Scottish Parliament or in Westminster ever said they hate England? Not to my knowledge. Now, perhaps if somebody can point to an example, post it in the comments below. But I've yet to hear anyone say such a thing. Now, their criticism of Westminster, yes, they have pointed out on a number of occasions for exactly the reasons you have pointed out. Scotland sends money to Westminster and they get very little back. They have no control over laws that are pushed through Parliament and they deem as damaging to the Scottish people. They don't have the numbers to stop that. And even if they were to form a coalition of all the Scottish MPs from all the parties, they still wouldn't be able to dent the majority that English MPs have in Parliament. So everything you've pointed out here is correct.
Stuff that is directly against Scotland's best interests always get voted in because Scotland's only about 6 million people, whereas England, I think, is about 68 million. I think it's 60 or 68 million. I don't remember. So basically, when it comes to votes, the Scots don't do that well. And they think the solution to that is to rejoin the EU, where all of that exact same stuff would happen.
No, that's you're comparing apples and oranges here. So as you pointed out, in Westminster, the SNP and Scottish MPs have very little influence over what happens in Westminster Parliament. But Scottish MEPs from different parties would form different coalitions in the European Parliament. And that's where they would have real power. Now, Scotland as a small country would have as much power as Estonia or Ireland or whatever. But by joining with other parties in the European Parliament, that's where they would have the power. At the moment, the SNP could join any other party if they would have them, but they won't have them. Like if the SNP joined with Labour, they would have influence, but the Labour Party have said no. The Conservatives have obviously said no. So the SNP have no power in Westminster. They can talk, but they can't influence anything. They can't stop legislation that they believe is bad for Scotland.
It's never made any sense to me. And see the sheer amount of Scottish nationalists, like whenever I'm out, whenever I go out like to a bar or something, the only time I go there is if it's a friend's birthday or like a wedding or something like that, and you always get a bunch of people who are like, I'm a Scottish nationalist. And it's like, all right, I believe in open borders. Yeah.
Sorry, what does that mean? I presume this guy is a unionist and a Brexiteer. So you're happy with an open border between Scotland and England? As a Brexiteer, I presume you're okay with an open border between France and England, because there are goods flowing in from France, from the European Union, unchecked. That's an open border, unless he means some other type of open border.
Or I was like, oh, should we rejoin the EU? Yeah. I'm sick of what Westminster's doing to us. I would rather the EU was doing it to us than ever.
Okay, I don't believe this. I know there are stupid people in every party, but I don't believe for a second somebody would say, I'm sick of what Westminster is doing. I want the EU to do it to us instead. So we're being punished by Westminster. I want to be punished by the EU. Like, unless you're some sort of masochist, I don't think that's really happening. Once again, there are strange people in every party, but I have a bit of doubt that somebody would actually say that.
Those people, like, see, Scottish nationalists, they're not nationalists. They're not.
Then what are they? If they claim to be nationalists and they want an independent Scotland, what else would you call them?
By any stretch. But the thing is even if Scotland did get its independence, it doesn't meet the criteria to join the EU. So it doesn't meet the basic criteria. SNP mocked for new fantasy plan to rejoin the EU. We literally don't meet the most basic stuff to actually join. Foreign policy.
Now, what this guy quotes here is a foreign policy expert speaking to GB News. Now, it seems the foreign policy expert he's talking about is the head of a unionist think tank. Okay? So he is somewhat biased. Okay? He's not completely independent. Now, I would prefer to listen to somebody who's independent. I'm not going to listen to the SNP. I'm not going to listen to the Conservatives or the Unionists. I'd actually prefer to listen to somebody who's independent and say whether Scotland would meet an independent Scotland would meet the criteria. Because it's pointless talking about Scotland meeting the criteria today, because Scotland's not independent today. And there's pointless talking about an independent Scotland today meeting the criteria, because, as I said, Scotland's not independent today. So when Scotland becomes independent, it will happen. When it becomes, the situation will be very different. And the criteria may have changed, or it may not have changed. But becoming independent and then joining a member of the European Union, becoming a member of the European Union, is a long process. So let's say Scotland becomes independent tomorrow. It's not going to be a member of the European Union the next day. It's going to take some time. So in that period of time, it's going to align with EU standards. It's going to reach out to the European Union and say, we'd like to become a member. We want to meet the criteria. So talking about it today makes no sense whatsoever, because Scotland, first of all, isn't independent today, and it's not joining the European Union today.
Policy expert Professor Azim Ibrahim told GB News that an independent Scotland wouldn't even fit the basic criteria for EU membership. Try telling that to SNP supporters, though. The SNP has been mocked for its new plan to rejoin the EU, with a commentator dismissing it as a fantasy. The foreign policy expert told GB News the paper shows the SNP no longer has any ideas on how an independent Scotland will function. That's one thing about the SNP as well. They are independence at any cost and will figure the shit out afterwards.
But that's not true either. I have seen a number of SNP people. Why are you focusing only on the SNP here? The SNP is not the whole independence movement. There are many sections of the independence movement, and the SNP is only one part of that. But even if you just want to focus on the SNP, they have talked about the currency. They talked about setting up a central bank. They've talked about, they're already reaching out to countries in Europe, trying to build better relations with those countries. The Home Office isn't too happy about that. But anyway, so I don't know what you're talking about. They don't have a plan.
If you talk to them, they don't have a game plan. They don't have a game plan. And that's one thing, if you talk to SNP supporters and people that believe...
Sorry, but they actually have more of a plan than Brexiteers had before the referendum. In the run-up to 2016, when you ask Brexiteers, what's Britain going to look like? Sunlit uplands. We'll be doing trade deals. We won't be going to Brussels to do trade deals. We'll be going to Berlin. Okay, we'll be doing trade deals with countries all over the world. They'll be wonderful trade. They'll be better than the trade deals we have with the European Union have implemented on our behalf. Yes.
Leaving like the fake independence that the SNP want. Because see, for part of the EU, we're not independent. We're not.
Please tell me this guy is a comedian. So if Scotland becomes independent and joins the European Union, it's no longer independent. So I'm here sitting in Italy. Italy's not independent. Anyone in Germany watching this, you're not independent. Germany's not independent. France isn't independent. So what is the criteria for being independent? Not being part of a bloc, not being part of an international organization. So is it important that Scotland, independent Scotland, doesn't join the United Nations, because then it is no longer independent, or NATO, or the World Trade Organization? But then that would mean that Britain is not independent either, because United Kingdom is part of the World Trade Organization, the United Nations, NATO. Is this guy suggesting that the UK leave all of these organisations to be truly independent? What about CPTPP? It joined that recently. There wasn't a referendum for that. Is he suggesting that it shouldn't because it's giving up its sovereignty, its independence? It's a bit of a head scratcher.
Oh, right. It doesn't matter what. Well, actually, we get a vote and we get a veto and we get. How about we have none of that and we just be an actual independent country?
So you actually want Scotland to be independent? I'm very confused by this YouTuber because at the beginning I was under the impression that he was a unionist. Now he seems to be making arguments for Scotland to be independent, but not to be part of the EU.
How about that? Yeah, we'll kind of be controlled by the EU, but we get like a veto.
Whoever said, anyone who's pro-EU, anyone who wants the UK to be part of the EU, have never said we want to be controlled by the EU. What does that even mean, controlled by the EU?
Oh wow, a veto. Yeah, how did that work out with Article 13? How'd that work out? Yeah, the vetoes didn't fucking matter then.
I'm not sure what he's talking about because I looked at Article 13 and I honestly don't know what he's meaning in this statement. You
get to veto the stupid stuff. You don't get to veto the stuff that all the club would like to put in. It's just nonsense. The SNP's new plan to rejoin the EU was included in the party's...
Wait a minute, I thought he didn't have a plan.
Building a new Scotland report series. The Scottish Government said it would use a tried and tested route to EU membership, relying on Article 49. Speaking ahead of the report's publication, the SNP's Constitution Secretary, Angus Robertson, dismissed Brexit as disastrous, because of course they would, calling...
But it is disastrous. Even Nigel Farage, the king of Brexit, said that Brexit has failed. Everyone's saying Brexit is a disaster. Even people who voted for Brexit are realising it's a disaster. If it's not a disaster, then please point to the examples of how it isn't a disaster or how it's wonderful.
Calling instead for an alternative direction for Scotland, which will detail our shared European values. I can already tell you right now, we have a very different idea of what European values are.
I'm not sure what European values like democracy, rule of law, human rights. What sort of European values are you talking about?
Sure, yeah. Robertson said independent countries like Scotland are wealthier and fairer than the UK. No, we're not. No, we're not. No, we're not at all. Wealthier, definitely fucking not. Everyone's like, the oil. The oil, yeah. It's a nice big boon, but it is nowhere near as much as you think it is. We technically sort of own the oil, but we've licensed it out to a private company.
What do you mean we? Is it we, or as in the United Kingdom, or we as in Scotland? Because Scotland doesn't have any control over the revenue of the oil. So the Westminster is controlling the revenue of the oil. Now, I'm happy to be corrected on that if I'm wrong, but it seems to be, he's saying that, well, the oil is great, but it's not all that much. And, okay. Whether it's a lot or not, an independent Scotland would be in control of the revenue of the oil. At the moment, I don't think that's the case.
And contractors. So they own a portion of the oil that they bring up because that is in the contract. You're going to renegotiate the contract? Yeah, good luck with that.
Well, I would imagine it would attempt to renegotiate. An independent Scotland would renegotiate the contract. They could nationalise. They could nationalise the oil wells and say, well, they are actually under public ownership now. We're going to buy them out. Now, of course, if there is a contract, that would be a contract with the United Kingdom government. I'm not an expert on international contracts, okay? So I don't know what would happen if the United Kingdom signed a contract with a supplier or a company who's extracting oil and gas, and then the UK ceased to exist. Because it would no longer be the United Kingdom of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. It would be the United Kingdom of England, Wales and Northern Ireland. So would that contract still be valid?
After you go independent, yeah. I'm pretty sure there's clauses in the contracts where the oil companies went, yeah, we'll totally make the platforms and extract the oil and stuff. But in the contract, I believe it says if you get independence and none of that changes, you can't change.
But you haven't seen the contracts and neither have I. So there's no point talking about what may or may not be in the contract.
Change the contract. The contract remains. And in that contract, England gets some of the oil. So, hey-ho, not much is going to change there. So with all our resources and talents, why not Scotland? Fairer? Scotland is not fairer. We've got the highest taxes in all of the UK. Everyone's like, there's no jobs in Scotland. Why are there no jobs? Because it literally saves so much more money if you base your factory or plant or whatever it is you're doing down in England. Legitimately, it saves you so much more money because the tax is cheaper. That's one thing that Scotland...
So what do you mean the taxes are cheaper? What taxes? Honestly, this is an honest question. What taxes are you talking about when you say the taxes are cheaper? There are a number of reasons why a business may set up in England as opposed to Scotland. It could be, well, generally the market. Wherever you're trying to sell your product, you want to be close to that market. So if the market is in England, then you're going to set up in England. It's nothing to do with Scotland or about taxes. Maybe it's the infrastructure. The infrastructure is better in England than it is in Scotland. So you're going to set up in England. Once again, I don't think this is anything to do with taxes. But if you're going to talk about taxes, you have to remember that the Scottish government have very little control over taxes. For example, VAT, corporation tax, inheritance tax. I'm trying to remember which ones are still under control of Westminster. Capital gains tax. Capital gains tax is controlled by Westminster, not the Scottish government. So when you're talking about taxes, what are you talking about? Is it council tax? Rates? Something like that? Because most of the taxes are controlled by Westminster. So in an independent Scotland, they would actually be able to lower taxes if they want, but they can't at the moment. So once again, your criticism of an independent Scotland is actually an argument in favour of it.
Scotland did was drive up the taxes as soon as that was passed over to them. What was it called again? I forget the phrase for handing over powers. It's used all the time as well, and I'm amazed.
Devolved. So when the powers are devolved, they increase it. But at least they have the powers to increase the taxes, but they want to increase taxes for better public services, for the people of Scotland. The opposite of austerity. The opposite of what the Tories are doing.
That I've forgotten it. But basically, taxes less in England. So why would you open your...
But once again, it's not all down to taxes. Companies don't... Look at when it comes to Ireland, many of the American companies set up because of the taxes, but not only because of the taxes. Because Ireland is part of the European Union. Okay. Ireland has an English-speaking workforce. It's open. It welcomes immigrants. The opposite of what the Tories and the right-wing want in Britain. The Tories and the right-wingers in Britain want to keep the immigrants out. We don't want these skilled people coming in and semi-skilled or so-called unskilled labour to do the work that we don't want to do. We don't want these people in. We want to keep them out. But Ireland is the opposite. It says we want to welcome immigrants because we understand that they add to the country. They add value. Now, there are problems. I'm not going to go into that. That's for another video. But there are problems with housing and stuff like that. But the core of the Irish economy is based on foreign investment.
A factory in Scotland when you could open it in England and pay less tax. Oh, look.
So no business is open in Scotland, I presume. Because if your argument is, well, if taxes are lower in England and businesses only care about that, then there must be no industry in Scotland. But that's not the case either.
All these problems, taxation costs, but it's fine. It's free money from the government. I give the government £20 and I get £2 worth of service. Socialism, yay!
Okay, guys, this video has gone on for almost 20 minutes, so I'm going to have to stop here. I've responded to just 5 minutes of his. But this has gone completely off why Scotland can't join the European Union. So the basic argument here is, well, at the current state of affairs, Scotland wouldn't be able to meet the criteria, and that's why Scotland shouldn't join the European Union. Scotland shouldn't join the European Union because it would lose its independence, whatever that means, and it would be under the control of the European Union. None of this makes any sense, because if you look at other countries around Europe who are members of the European Union, they're doing quite well. Some are doing better than others. That's related to the policies on the ground. Scotland needs to become independent. It needs to present its case to the European Union, and then the European Union will decide whether Scotland meets the criteria to join or not. There's no point us talking about this right now. It makes no sense whatsoever. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.